Daf Nun Vav. We're going to begin about 7 lines in. 10 lines in. Tana Rabbana. So the Brisa taught, Bal Rava, if somebody's going to square off the city, the squaring off of the city should happen according to the squaring off of the world, meaning a straight due north line, east and west lines, and a southern line. And every city is going to be squared off that way. That means the northernmost protrusion structure of the city is going to be where you make a line due east-west on the north side of the city, and same on the southern side of the city by the farthest southern protrusion, house, structure, living quarters. And that's the way you do it. So the northernmost place is going to be the north line, to the north of the world, and the southernmost line to the south of the world. And how are you going to know what's the north and what's the south? Now, we have a compass today, and we have Google Earth that's going to help us. But how do you do it back when? So the Gemara says, if you're going to want to know, so you're going to use the constellations as your way to tell. Egla b'tzafon, the calf is in the north, which is Taurus. And Akriv b'Doram, and the scorpion is at the south, and that's how you know what's due north and due south. However, if you don't exactly know how to do that, so then there's another calculation. Rabbi Tzvi, if you don't know how to do it based on that, so what you're going to do is Merabah Kamin Atakufa. You're going to do it based on the calculation of the Tekufa, which is there are 4 seasons, 4 Tekufas, and these are winter solstice, spring, actually starts with spring equinox, summer solstice, fall equinox, and winter solstice. And these are the calculations of the world. And by that you're going to know, meaning at equinox, the sun is going to be mid sky. It's going to come it's going to rise mid sky, and it's going to set at mid sky. However, at the summer equinox, it's going to be as far north as it can be, and as the Gemara first is going to say, it's going to rise at the northeastmost point, and then it's going to set on the west on the northernmost point, and then it continues circling throughout the next half a year till it gets to the winter solstice, where it's going to be at its southernmost point, and that's how you're going to know. And these are called tekufas Tammuz. The north is tekufas Tammuz, and the south is tekufas Teves. When the longest day of the summer comes, where the sun comes up and the sun goes down, that's the northernmost line. So where the sun comes up and goes down on the shortest day of the year, which is the winter solstice. So then that line is the southernmost line. However, at the equinox in the fall and spring, then it's actually going to be mid-sky. That's where the sun is going to come exactly at the mid-sky, and that's when you know when it is when the sun is going to be the northernmost and southernmost side. However, Shenemar, and we know this because it says Holech el Doro. The sun goes to the south. Now we know that the sun goes east to west. So what does it mean it goes to the south? That when it comes up at the northernmost point, it's going to start circling towards the south and go down. And then it's going to turn back up to the north. That's when it hits its southernmost point. It's going to start circling to the north. Now, what the first opinion says is that it's going to go to the south, and it's going to remain in the south during the day and only start turning upwards during the nighttime. It's going to turn up in the nighttime. And the wind turns and comes in that direction. The wind going to the north and to the east and west. These are the winds. Sometimes it comes up, and sometimes it curves around. So this is the wind, and the idea is that we can tell what is the northernmost and southernmost point based on where the sun comes up and goes down. And in the summer, it goes up. It'll come up and go down, and that line is the northernmost, and the southernmost is. And the southernmost is going to be what the line in the winter. However, a Mesharshe is going to disagree and is going to say it never actually is going to come up and go down at the northernmost points, because sometime in the middle of the day it will switch and become and start turning towards the south. And this is because of the calculations of the equinox and the solstice. Basically, the calculation goes like this, and we're going to see this in the Gemara in a moment. That a year is 365 days. If we count this calculation of 365 days, let me see where this calculation is. Yeah. If we have 365 days in a year, essentially what you have is that 360 is your divisible by 4 seasons. So each season is going to be essentially 90 days, plus the 5 is going to mean that it's 91 days plus 7.5 hours. So since it's 91 days plus 7.5 hours, 91 days is divisible by weeks, by 7, and therefore it's essentially 13 weeks. And in addition, there's also 7.5 hours. That means that every season, let's start from the beginning. The sun was set in its cycle on Wednesday in the creation story in Bereshis. So let's start there. That means the next season, the sun was at its point on a Wednesday as well, but the next season began 7.5 hours into the day. Then the next season came, it was still Wednesday, but it was now 15 hours into the day because it was 7.5 and 7.5. The next season was 13 weeks after that, still on a Wednesday, but now it was 22.5 hours into the day, meaning an hour and a half before the end of the day. And then the next season was already on Thursday, meaning when it came back a full year, it was a day later, and plus 6 hours ahead, because it's 7.5 hours ahead, leaving 1.5 hours into the previous day, 6 hours into the day. And essentially what this means is that the winter solstice is always going to be either at 10:30 a.m. or 10:30 p.m. in this calculation, or 4:30 a.m. or 4:30 p.m., meaning it is always going to be an hour and a half before noon, or an hour and a half before nighttime, or an hour and a half before midnight. And the same thing goes with the fall equinox. It's always going to be 3 hours into the day, or 3 hours into the night, or 3 hours before the night, or 3 hours before the day. And the same goes for the summer. It's always going to be either an hour and a half into the day, or an hour and a half before the end of the day, or an hour and a half after midday. This calculation is what the Gemara is making, and based on this, essentially, if the sun rises at the northernmost point on the east, it'll midday some point start coming down towards the south. And if the north is the north, and if the west is the northernmost point, it will not have been at the northernmost point at the in the morning when it arose, and the next morning it won't be in the northernmost point either. So Mashasha is going to say it's never going to be exactly the northernmost point. And this is the calculation, essentially, that he says. Amar Mashasha, less than a halakalali. This rule that he said that it's always going to be the northernmost point, that the southernmost point is not correct. The Tanya has learned, the sun never came up and went down in the east and the west at the northernmost point on the same day. Because midday, it's going to start turning towards the south and begin heading towards winter. And similarly, in the south, it never came up on the east and went down on the west, on the southernmost side, on both in the morning and the evening, because at some point, middle of the day, it will have started heading towards summer. Amar Shmuel. So Shmuel now said the calculation. Tekufas Nisan Afelas Ella Ba'arba Riveyom. The spring equinox is always going to be at the 4 quarters of the day. It's always going to be either 12 a.m., meaning at the at midnight, or at midday, or at sunrise, or at sunset. It's always going to be exactly at the moment that the day begins and ends. And based on this calculation, because it's always 13 weeks plus 7.5 hours, and since it's 7.5 hours, you have 6 hours, which is a half a day, and then in 4 seasons, you're going to have another 1.5 hours and 1.5 hours and 1.5 hours and 1.5 hours. Again, that's going to be a 6-hour period. So you're always going to have it in order of 6 times what it is. So it's either midday, midnight, at the beginning of the day, beginning of the night. It's always a 6-hour change. And also the summer solstice is always going to be either 1.5 hours into the day, or an hour and a half after midday, and then it will be whether by day or by night, it's always going to be the same. An hour and a half into the night, or an hour and a half after midnight. And the fall equinox is always going to be the same calculation as the spring equinox, but a half a day off, because it's a half hour plus an hour and a half plus an hour and a half. So it's 3 hours off of that. So it's always going to be either 3 hours into the day, or 3 hours before the end of the day, 3 hours into the night, or 3 hours before the end of the night. Maybe laila. And the same for the winter the winter solstice. It's always going to be either an hour and a half before the end of the day, or an hour and a half before the end of the night, or an hour and a half before midday, or an hour and a half before midnight. Now, so between each season, you have 91 days, plus 7.5 hours. So essentially, the tekufa is only going to be off of its previous, the previous one, only by a half hour, which is the calculation of the 7.5. Now it goes into the cycles of the constellations, which are the 7 planets, which are called Kochav, Tzedek, Noga, Shabtai, Chama, Levana, Madim. And there's a calculation of which one is visible in the day. Each one is going to be a 7.5 hour period. Now, I don't understand what it means that they're visible or what they are. I'm not so well versed in this, but the idea is that there are these 7 constellations, or 7 the planets that are visible, and the change of the seasons will happen when during the day one of these stars are the one that are visible, and tzedek that star is not going to be, it'll never happen that the change of winter solstice or summer summer solstice is going to happen during tzedek, and if it does, it will damage it will be harsh on all the crops. So if the spring equinox happens in tzedek, then the winds will break all the trees, and if the winter solstice happens in tzedek, then it would dry out all of the plants. And this is if the Molad Lavana, if the new moon is visible, is going to be visible for that spring season, which is going to be Nisan, or for that winter season, which is going to be Teves. It's going to be visible either when it's moon or when it's tzedek. When it's either one of those, then it's going to be damaging to the crops. That's constellation stuff. I'm not so sure what these 7 constellations, how they're visible. In any case, the last halacha, the last one is part of this calculation of the tkufos, the seasons. But what we learn is that the seasons are always going to change midday. Well, not necessarily always midday, but it's always going to either still be going downward. Let's say going from summer to winter, it's always going to still be moving southward during the day. And if it's already at the lowest point at the beginning of the day, then it's going to be heading northward already by the end of that day. Now we turn to Nun Vav Amud Beis. You go to the second side of the Gemara, and we're going to learn the halachas of squaring off Techum Shabbos. So, Tana Rabbana, Rabbi Seir, somebody who squares off a city, also it's a kamin tavla. It's going to make it like a tavla, which is a square, a complete square, like a plate, a tablet. Murabas, that's square. But not only that, he also makes a calculation of squaring off the Techum, which means that even if the city was a circle, he's going to make a square around the city, which we've already seen. And that's based on that you take the northernmost point of the city and you make a straight line, and the southernmost point of the city, you make a straight line, and the east and the west as well, and then you get a square. So assuming, as the Gemara is going to tell us in a moment, this city is 2,000 amma across. So we're going to have a 2,000 amma by 2,000 amma square for the city itself. Now you're allowed to travel 2,000 amma outside of that city. So if you go due east, due west, due north, or due south, you're going to have a straight 2,000 amma. However, if you're going to go to off to the sides, that would then curve it, and you would have the 2,000 amma from the corner, which would then mean that it's basically curved. To which he says, no, even the Techum itself gets squared off. And the way you do that is you take a 2,000 amma line at the northernmost line off to 2,000 amma, as well as to the westernmost line to the up there. And then you make a square out of that, which gives you a full square. Now, how much is that going to equal? The circle, the square over the circle is going to give you, if this is 2,000 amma, it's going to give you another 400 amma to 24. It's going to mean that you have a 2,400 amma here. Now, additionally, this is going to be another 800 amma. So instead of it being 2,000 amma away, you're going to have an additional 800 amma, meaning the total gain is going to be a 1,200 amma over the 2,000 amma, meaning from the city walls, if it were a circle, in the hypotenuse down on the 45-degree angle to the corner, it's going to be a full 3,200 amma of travel. When you measure, you don't measure from the middle of the corner, which would be measuring from here all the way straight 2,000 amma. is obvious because then you're going to lose the corners. So rather you take a 2,000 by 2,000 amma and you put it directly to the corner of the city. So this is what we said, that the city itself is going to gain 400 amma just on squaring off the circle. And additionally, because you're not measuring 2,000 amma from here, but rather you're measuring 2,000 amma square, you're going to gain 800 over here and 800 over here. So on each side, you're gaining a total of 1,200. A total gain in this, if you're going from the city, you're not going due north or due east, but rather you're going northeast, then you're going to gain a total of 1,200 amma, or in the total distance, 2,400 amma, and you're going to be allowed to travel, besides for the city itself, a total of 6,400 amma east, northeast, and southwest. You gain 1,200 in one angle and 1,200 in the other angle. And this means, this is all talking about that the city itself was 2,000. So the square around it is going to be 2,000 by 2,000. And that's the way you calculate this gain that the city has. Tanya, we learned. Amar Rabbi Lezer. An introduction for this part of the daf is to teach us that the Torah told us that there are refuge cities that are Levium cities, cities that the Levite would have. Outside of that city, it says you have to leave it fallow. You can't plant vineyards or orchards or gardens in the first 1,000 amma around the city. That 1,000 amma has to be left as just a migrash, an open field for the beauty of the city. Outside of that, you can have another 1,000 amma, which you're going to plant as your vineyards and your orchards and your fields. So Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yossi says, outside of the city of the Levite city is going to be 2,000 amma. Of those 2,000 amma, you're going to have 1,000 amma that is going to be left open. So that's the city that's going to be left open outside the city. Say mehen elef amma migrash. If you exclude the 1,000 amma, that's a migrash, that's an open field. Nimtza migrash ravia v'shar sadis krum, which tells us that the migrash, meaning the city itself, the open field, is going to be a quarter of the techum, of the area outside of the city, and the remainder is going to be vineyards and fields. To which the Gemara is going to challenge soon and going to say, "What are you talking about? It's a quarter. It's not a quarter. It's much less. How did you get to the number being a quarter?" So first we say, how do we know this idea that you have to leave open space around the city? Amar Rav Amar Kra, it says Mikir Ha'ir, from the wall of the city, v'chutza, outside, Elef Amma Saviv, 1,000 Amma around the city. So you're going to have 1,000 amma around the city. Amar Torah Saveva Seir be'elef, 1,000 amma around the city. Nimtza migrash rovia. So you're going to have the city being the migrash, meaning the field, is going to be the field around the Levite city is going to be a quarter. To which the Gemara says, I don't know what you're talking about. How did you get to a calculation of a quarter? So the Gemara now is going to explain. So imagine the Levite city is 2,000 amma by 2,000 amma. That means that the Techum Shabbos directly outside of each one of the cities, due east, due west, due north, and due south, is going to be 2,000 amma. Square them by 1,000 by 1,000 each. So you're going to have 16 16,000 by 1,000 each square. 16 such squares of 1,000 by 1,000. Additionally, you also have the corners. Each one of the corners are also going to be 16 corners of 1,000 each. So the Gemara says, wait, so that's palga hava. That's going to be half. Amar Rav Bar Ada Meshucha Asbrali. So Rav Bar Ada Meshucha explained to me, Mishkachas lo b'masad hava trei alfi al trei alfi. The city itself was 2,000 by 2,000. Tchum kama hava shitza koronas. Shitza. So there are 16 1,000 by 1,000 square in the Tchum itself, and then additionally the corners are also going to be another 16. Koronas kama hava shitza dal tamanya de Tchumim. Va'arba de koronas kama hava. So if you take out 8, so these are the darker colored here. So you take out the 8 squares that are directly in the outside of the city, and then you take the 4 additional of the corners. So that gives you 12 of these 1,000 by 1,000 squares. 12 of them are in the 1,000 amma around the city, and we had 32. So if you took out 12, that leaves you with 20. Around the city, on the outside. So 12 against 20. Nimtza migrash ravia, so that's a third. And that's a quarter. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? It's more than a third. What are you talking about? It's a quarter. It's even more than a third. Because 10 and 20 would be the total. The total is 30, 10 of which is the around, that would be a third. But your 12 of 32, leaving 12 in the 1,000 amma of the city that are open field, and 20 that can be planted, that's less. So the Gemara says, I see arba'a demasa shadei alai. You have to include also the 4. And since it's a city that's 2,000 by 2,000, so you have 4,000 square amma. So each 1,000 by 1,000 is going to be another 4. So that means, which you can plant. That means you have 24 that you can plant and 12 that you may not plant. Yeah. So akati tilta hava, that's still only a third. That means that you have 36 total amma, such squares of 1,000 by 1,000. And you can plant 12. You can't plant 12 of them. That's only a third. So the Gemara says, "Misavers beribua kamar beigula kamar." You're thinking that we're talking about a square city. We're actually talking about a circular city, and a circular city loses a quarter in the corners itself. Additionally, for Shabbos and for the Tachum, for the measure outside of the city, we square it. But for the 1,000 amma that you have to leave fallow, and you're not allowed to plant vineyards and orchards outside of your city, of the Levite city, the Arlavim, that's only the actual 1,000. So it's a circle. So if you calculate that, you're actually going to be only 1,000 amma around. Kama meruba yoser ala agul. How much is a square more than a circle? Ravia, that's a quarter. Dal ravia minai. So you have to remove a quarter from the 12,000 square amas that you had, the 1,000 by 1,000 squares, which leaves you pashalu tisha, which leaves you with just 9,000. V'tisha mitlasa meshita. And now but the total squares are 36. If you have 9 of 36, riva, hava, that's a quarter. Tomorrow, Be'ez Hashem, we'll see Abaya's calculation for this quarter that we're talking about.